So task 3.2. So this is our work with FEMA's OpenFEMA data, looking at restoration recovery resources for housing infrastructure, public, nonprofit facilities and services, just in case you couldn't read the title yourself. Our goal in looking at these data are to really kind of, one, identify the federal funding resources for recovery and mitigation, but really to establish who, where, what, when, and how much with respect to funding from these various resources. Our goal is to really capture it as spatially as fine a resolution as possible, even down to identifying the facility or entity that's actually getting the funding and timing, et cetera. And then the nature of the projects, the restrictions there might be on the funding, timing, and then funding amounts as well. I'm going to be talking mostly about the work we've done in Galveston City and County, the key, focusing on Hurricane Ike. So this is for the test bed work. Some stuff we're doing with Hurricane Harvey in Texas and why we are doing that, hopefully will become clear by the end of this. And then other test beds as well too, Lumberton and Joplin, although I hear work's going on Lumberton anyway, so maybe we don't need to focus on that, but we can deal with that later. So the data sets we're looking at are these public data sets. My talk today is really on the public assistance and on the individual assistance data. Why we are focusing on that is because it represents 72%. Can y'all see the pointer as well? 72% of all the kind of disaster recovery funding that's been obligated since between 2002 and 2020, with 53% of it in public assistance and then 19% in individual assistance. So we're hitting the two major kind of programs here. The data sets that I'm talking about, first with respect to the individual assistance, there are two data sets we're working with, a valid registration data set and then the large disaster data sets. And these are both at the micro level. By that, we mean that it's at the application level. So for each individual household or individual that's applying, that's kind of the unit of analysis. The ability to kind of spatially locate that, though, is quite variable. So with the valid registration, we can only locate it at city, zip code, or county. For the large data sets, however, we can get down to the census block, which is a pretty fine resolution, although not where I want it, but the final, but anyway, it's close. And the valid registration goes from 2003 to 2022. It's, of course, continuing to evolve. Lots of data in there. There's 70 different variables in there that can be utilized. The the large data is only since 2017. It's really unclear when something is determined to be large disaster and when it comes out in this format. So that's kind of an open question in terms of how this data will evolve. The reason we're focusing on that is because we're focused on Hurricane Harvey, which we have been involved in, and really exploring some of the ability to kind of do some modeling that we could incorporate into core, and I'll talk about that more completely in a few minutes. The public assistance data, there's actually three different data sets. So one is the application data itself, so it's information about the applicant. And then there's that data along with project summary data, and then finally detailed data on projects. So these have been merged together to create a hierarchical data set. We were able to merge it together to actually look then at applicant, project summaries, and then the detailed project information as well too. The little bar graph kind of gives you an idea of some of the categories funded, and I'll get into more of that in a few minutes here. Well, actually, I'll jump into it right now. What the hell? So the public assistance program first, a little bit about that, as well as about the data that we're pulling together for the Galveston test bed. These are the eligible applicants that can, in other words, who can apply for this public assistance data. State and territorial governments, tribal governments, local governments, as well as a lot of governmental entities and agencies as well, and private nonprofit organizations. So there are a variety of different organizations and entities that can be applicants for these data. A little bit about what and how much is funded. Basically, FEMA breaks these down into two broad categories. Emergency work and permanent work. Under emergency work includes debris removal, emergency protective services, so some restoration kinds of activities there, and then the permanent work, so roads and bridges, water control facilities, so dams, levees, and things of that nature, buildings and equipment, including contents, utilities, as well as parks and recreation. That's really a heterogeneous category that also includes rail, piers, ports, harbors, lots of different kinds of facilities that can be coded to that. Those categories are coded in all of the data. So we at least have those categories. Unfortunately, they can be quite heterogeneous in there, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. You can kind of see the breakdown about what 57% funding goes to permanent work and about 43% to emergency work. This kind of gives you a sense of the numbers and areas that had disaster declarations with respect to Hurricane Ike. We're going to be dealing with just Galveston County. We are also looking at the state of Texas, and we've done a little bit with the other areas as well. But you can see it's 7 states, multiple disaster numbers, which are critical for utilizing any of the other data in there. So you get this data from the disaster declaration data sets, and then you have to figure that where to look for these other data as well too and stuff. So we're focusing again on the Galveston City and County. If we look at who was funded in Galveston County, there's 78 applicants. This gives you a sense. The county, lots of municipalities, a host of educational organizations, municipal utility networks, you name it, different government entities and governments, as well as nonprofits, can be funded and were funded out of this fund. So it gives you a sense of at least a little bit about who. However, that's only part of the picture. If you only look at the county, you're in big trouble because you're going to miss a hell of a lot. And part of that is funding that comes through the state as well as surrounding counties too. But with the state, if you think about Texas A&M, Galveston is there. So that funding comes through the state, through Texas A&M, University of Texas Medical Branch. It comes through the state. Again, with that one, it's Galveston City, Alvin, Anglin, all these different municipalities, and then a host of other state entities that could have obtained funding that actually goes into the county for different facilities in the county. This gives you a kind of a broad picture. The top 3 panels, the table and the 2 figures, are for all public assistance projects between 2000 and 2021. So you get a sense of the breakdown of the amounts of funds that have gone in, as well as a little bit of the timing. The bottom panels are all for Galveston County. So if you look at the table, you can get a sense of the amount of funding for each of these different categories, the number of projects that were funded by the categories, and the average amounts that were funded by these for each of the projects in these categories. We also have the timing curves for projects. That's the center figure there. And then weighted by the amounts of funding that went in and when that funding goes in as well, too. So you can see, for example, that utilities didn't get 80% of their funding until almost year 6 in post-Hurricane Ike. And you can see there's a degree of variation there in terms of what is being funded. Debris and protective measures always are earlier, but these others are much later as well, too. To get a sense of the difficulties of trying to place where this funding is going in, this are the independent school districts that are in Galveston County and straddle Galveston and Harris County. Those would be the applicants. The little dots represent the schools, so that's where the funding's going. But there are also lots that's missing here as well, too. Other facilities, bus depots, administrative offices, et cetera, et cetera. And so to get a full picture, you have to go through the data qualitatively. If you all have seen Wayne Day, he had a full head of hair when he started this process, and he's as bad as I am now. But this gives you a sense of what's going on. So if the top right-hand side is the funding that went into Galveston ISD. So about $24.5 million for 103 projects. The bottom table is where that funding went. So broken down into the individual schools and facilities where that funding went. And again, the similar sets of curves there for projects as well as for projects weighted by the amount of funding. So you can see that Galveston, the bottom left-hand, Galveston was, its funding is stretched out way past 3 years as well. Individual assistance programs, again, there's 2 data sets we're looking at, valid as well as large data sets. When you think about the individual assistance program, it's really a complex set of programs. So individual assistance, and we're focusing on the individual and household program because we're interested in housing assistance, so rental, home repair, home replacement, and other needs. So that's what other personal losses that households are funding. Both data sets carry the information about rental and home repair and replacement. Only the valid registrations consist of the other needs assessments as well, too. The process is also critical. So we've got all the disaster declaration and stuff, but we're modeling everything in blue and green. And we're modeling it at the aggregate level as well as at the individual level. So first of all, who or what proportion of households are applying? And then at the aggregate level as well, that process of inspection, eligibility, and funding. And then at the individual level, we're modeling the stuff in green as well, too. So we're both doing aggregate level fund modeling as well as individual or household level funding, modeling of funding. This kind of gives you a sense of the breakdown for Galveston. So there were 72,000 applications. This is for Galveston County. In the state, there were 700,000 applications. So that gives you a sense, okay? 98% seem to be workable. There's, like, we can talk about that if you're interested. Those are split into homeowner and renters. These are the numbers inspected. If they're not inspected, you are not getting funding. There are then determinations about the eligibility, and this tells you then the number of homeowners that were funded and what they were funded for, as well as then for renters and what they were funded for. So it kind of gives you an overall breakdown of each phase of that process. This is then the data that we can place spatially. So this represents then the total repair funding for housing that went into each of the zip code areas. This gives you the average repair and replacement funding for each of the zip code areas, the rental assistance for homeowners in those areas, and the rental assistance for renters in those areas. So you can see that much of that funding went into the island, but there were also substantial proportions that went into other areas of the county as well. With Hurricane Harvey, we're able to get at, again, richer and more spatially refined modeling as well too. Hurricane Harvey, if y'all remember, was a wind event for the coastal Bend area, and then a massive flood event up in the Houston, Galveston, Sabine Pass area as well too. This gives you a sense then of the number of applications, almost 900,000 applications that went in, and about 170 were actually funded. This gives you the breakdown in terms of homeowner and rentals, and then the numbers that were funded as well. So about 27, almost 28% of the homeowners that applied were funded, and about 11% of the renters as well too. So, and then what they were funded at. Remember, this does not include personal private loss in this. What we're doing is we're modeling, again, this at the individual level as well as at the aggregate level. At the individual level, we're, for example, modeling, who's inspected, and then the eligibility for homeowners and renters. And this just gives you an idea of what our findings are in terms of positive versus negative effects with respect to the different attributes that we're including in our model. We're also doing it at the aggregate level, where we're modeling applications, both the numbers as well as percent, inspections, and then eligibility across these. This gives you a sense of the data that we're employing. And what we're hoping to do is kind of estimate, again, the number of applications, the eligibility of applications as well too, and potentially incorporate that into NCORE for post-recovery, for pre and post-recovery planning activities. We actually presented this to the census last week in their resiliency indicators work, and they seemed to be pretty excited about what we were doing as well too and stuff. Where we're headed, we're reworking and resubmitting FOIAs. hopefully get what we really want this next time. Targeting education and healthcare institutions. And again, right now, the PA data has been linked in with specific ISDs and school facilities, so we can use that to validate some of the damage estimates as well as recovery and restoration modeling. I want to expand the PA analysis from not just Texas, but nationwide to actually get some better estimates of timing and the curves as well. I want to explore incorporating this in the CGE, given its spatial and the amounts and timing that is possible, as well as recovery optimization decision-making. So we want to meet with Charles on that, and then incorporating the AI recovery modeling into NCORE, tackle other test beds, and then bring the hazard mitigation funding stuff online as well. Farina's is helping us with that as well, too. And that is it.